Good evening, friends. I welcome all for this 18th webinar of Corporate Professional. Friends, during COVID, we have utilized and tried that we can uh, provide the best knowledge for the benefit of corporate and the professionals. We have made Friday the day of knowledge sharing, and every Friday we are organizing program on some topical interest. We have started this process by inviting various dignitaries of eminence, and they are sharing their knowledge and solving the queries and questions of participants. Today we have selected this topic, current IBC, current development and road ahead for ease of doing business and economic growth. Friends, no doubt when we talk about the current development, the IBC point we will discuss, but the most important thing is what is road ahead. Road ahead mean today we are seeing, because COVID has impacted the entire world, including insolvency law also, and the business specifically. So we want to discuss today what are the road ahead for insolvency law and the process, and then simultaneously we are preparing ourselves for future. So ease of doing business to economic growth, that is the main focus which we will discuss today, because as you are aware that the basic aim was that how we can make doing business easy, but doing business easy is a one stepping stone, but after that it has to reach to economic growth, like reduction of NPA, change in culture, fast resolution, value creation, and various other aspects. Today we have invited the best person who can discuss about IBC. His knowledge and passion is par excellence. It is none other than Dr. M.S. Sahu. Mr. Sahu, Dr. Sahu is, he doesn't require any introduction, but because he has achieved so many things and so many members are not aware, so I'm just narrating uh, his profile. Dr. Sahu is a chairperson of IBC. He has worked as a member of Competition Commission, whole-time member of SEBI, economic advisor with National Stock Exchange, and he has held senior position in Government of India, including he was Secretary of Institute of Company Secretary for a shorter period, and he is a member of Indian Economic Service. Dr. Sahu is a postgraduate in economics, law management and company secretaryship. He is a fellow company secretary. Dr. Sahu is a acclaimed thought leader. He, in the area of securities market, some of his major reform which I want to highlight today to all members, that whatever we are seeing so many development in capital market, credit goes to Dr. Sahu. This include dematerialization of security, trading of derivatives, online exams for market professionals, setting up NIFM, demutualization of stock exchange, trading of currency derivatives, and rule of law in securities law market. Dr. Sahu has authored several books and publication relating to securities market, and he has delivered various talks in national and international fora, written more than 100 articles. Dr. Sahu is a member of chairman of several committees set up by Ministry of Finance, SEBI, RBI, IDA, and WDRA. These include chairman of committee of Sahu Committee 1, 2, 3 on depository receipt, domestic and overseas capital market, and external commercial borrowing. He has assisted in development and refinement of the Indian Financial Code (IFC), recommended by the Financial Sector Legislative Reforms Committee. He has served on boards of various organizations, including Oriental Bank, MDI Gurgaon, National Institute of Securities Market, NISFM, SEBI, and CCI. More than this, he is a thorough gentleman. His knowledge is par excellence. His knowledge is not just knowledge, it's a depth of any subject. I have interacted with him so many times, and the most important thing is he is the guru for all of us. We welcome you, sir. And I remember your one quote when we will discuss on IBC today, and he has said the best use of this code is not to use this code. This is one point, and this code, this particular message which he has given, it has multiple meanings. Okay, so we welcome Dr. Sahu, and then our second panelist is Mr. Manoj Kumar. He's a partner in Corporate Professional, and he is the head of corporate restructuring, insolvency, and the transaction advisory. Manoj is also a very learned person. He is a professionally company secretary, but he is a man which we call in our office as a Chalta Fatta Ramaya, and his knowledge and his transaction is very important to understand. He has done more than 400 mergers and various restructuring he has planned, and today we will listen his point of view. So friends, purpose of this program to prepare for future on insolvency law. Now, I will just give a brief introduction of this topic, and then I'll request Dr. Sahu to take up, and the program structure will be like this. After my introductory thing, then Dr. Sahu will speak, and then Manoj will raise certain questions which we have received, and then we'll take question answer from the public. So anybody has any question, please share with us, and we will give all answers. Manoj, my screen is you are able to see? Manoj,
just make it, yes sir, just make it full screen.
It's not coming full?
No, it's in slide mode. Just change to the presentation mode.
Okay. It is okay now?
No, still it has gone to page number 2-3.
Manoj, just see this. It's okay?
No, sir. Still it is edit mode.
Can you just take this slides to?
Sir, please close it and open it again.
Okay. Vivek, aaya?
No.
Vivek, I have sent it to you. Just open it. Vivek?
Sir, okay, sir. Just a second.
Okay. So, friends, till the time the slide close it. So, I will just share this point that today we are discussing this IBC current development and road ahead from ease of doing business to economic growth. Friends, as you are aware, that insolvency law came in 1st December 2016, and from that it has changed so many things. First, this law came after going through the various scrutiny of Parliament committee, and then it was passed by Parliament, both the House, and then President gave assent, and then 1st December 2016 the IBC came into effect. Till that, we have changed so many changes in this. First change we have seen that eligibility of resolution applicant for submitting resolution plan barring defaulting promoter to bid for the company, section 29A has changed. Then voting threshold has changed to 75 to 66%. Then we have seen categories of home buyer including as a financial creditor, and then threshold as filing application for 10% of total number of 100 under same real estate project. Then applicability of Limitation Act on the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, that has changed. Withdrawal of application by COC having approval of 90%, that has changed. Allowing comprehensive corporate restructuring through merger, amalgamation and demerger under resolution plan and liquidation, that has changed under section 226 and regulation 37. Then resolution plan shall be binding on all stakeholders, including the central government and state government, that has changed. Next, Vivek, third slide. Next slide. Yeah. Then manner of distribution of amongst financial and operational creditors under resolution plan has changed. Timeline for completion of CIRP increased to overall limit to 330 days. Then corporate debtor cannot be prosecuted for any offense committed prior to commencement of CIRP if resolution plan has been approved by NCLT, that has changed. So these are the major amendment has taken place, but simultaneously evaluation of law through judicial pronouncement has taken place also. So various new things has come. So the major thing is the resolution plan is not approved by requisite percentage of voting share of the financial creditor within the statutory period of 220, it is liable to liquidated. Supreme Court has said only in exceptional case limit of 330 days will be extended. Then NCLT have no jurisdiction authority to analyze and evaluate commercial decision of COC. Supreme Court has said the role of RP under IBC is administrative and not adjudicatory. That is Supreme Court has decided. Next. Then fair and equitable treatment of operational credit means that resolution plans should protect their interests, but it did not mean proportionate payment of debts. That Supreme Court has said. Then RBI issued circular directing bank for initiating CIRP, but the Supreme Court has non-est in this law, and RBI circular declare ultra virus. NCLT on receipt of rejected resolution plan is not expected to anything more what is obligatory to initiate liquidated process against the corporate debtor. Supreme Court has decided. Then Supreme Court has decided for effective participation of directors in meeting of COC, directors are entitled to receive copy so they can participate effectively. Next. Then once a resolution plan is approved by COC, it shall be binding to all stakeholders, including the guarantor, and the resolution plan would therefore limit the guarantor's right to subrogation towards the creditor. That is also decided. And in one case of High Court has decided corporate debtor cannot be prosecuted for any offense committed prior to commencement of CIRP. Then NCLT has power and authority to pass an interim order of direct moratorium period over the corporate debtors if there is a apprehension of selling of asset by the corporate debtor or its director. Exit route under 12A of code, that is withdrawing the application, is only provided to the applicant invoking section 7, 9, 10 of the code and non-applicable to resolution applicant. Now these are the cases where judicial pronouncement has decided and various things have changed. This is the journey so far. Friends, our NPA was 11.92%, which has reduced to 9% in last 7 years. NPA is non-standard asset is becoming standard, and simultaneously, if you see 3,374 companies under CIRP, out of this 2,170 CIRP is going on, 914 companies has gone for liquidation, 221 resolved, 157 withdrawn, and appeal and reviewed, that is 312. If you see the amount, the resolve is 2 lakh crore, liquidation is 7 lakh crore, and the CRP is going 3 lakh crore. So total NPA is 20 lakh crore, out, that is 10% of GDP. If you see the top 12 cases which were there, Electro Steel taken over by Vedanta, 40% claim received. Bhushan Steel taken over by Tata Steel, 63% received. Monnet Ispat has taken over by JSW and Aeon, 26% received. SR Steel and SR Mittal, that is the highest, 82.91% received, that claim release. Next. Then Alok Industry, that is Reliance, has taken over, that is a 17%. Jyoti Structure 50%, JP Infrastructure NBFC 100% has taken more than 100%, and Bhushan Power, that is 41%. These are the case has settled. Emta Quattro is under CIRP, Era Infrastructure under CIRP, and these two companies are under liquidation, Lenco and ABG Shipyard. all remaining out of this 12 company that has settled. If you see the recovery under IBC versus other forum, the Lok Adalat 4% and 5%, DRT 5% and 3%, SARFAESI 32 and 14%, but IBC's 50% and 43%. So you can see the IBC is an effective tool. Now, if you see the ease of doing business, the India ranking was in 2016 was 130, 1700, 1877, 1963. Now, if you see this report, we have reached to 63. We have reached to 63 position. It is an improvement of 67th position. Now, with this, India earned a place among the worst top countries. You can realize that this is how things are changing. No doubt, this benefit which is taking place, it is across. Vendors are getting benefited, employees are getting benefited, government of India is getting benefited, and everybody is getting benefited. So this code has improved India's ease of doing business ranking. And if you see this entire ranking of this particular 63, then you can find that insolvency has improved, has given a lot of contribution in this. Next slide. Next. So if you see rank, because if you see the calculation of ease of doing business, they have a various parameter, opening of company, electricity, insolvency, and various how to get a finance, how to close a company, all the things. So if you see the rank in 2016, the rank of insolvency was 136, 17 also 136, 2018, because 16 there was no law, 17 law came, but it was in the implementation process. 18 it has improved 103, 2019 it has 108, it has increased because of some things, and now it is 52. So the insolvency rank was 136, has reached to 52, and that has given a lot of contribution in this. And the most important thing is the time taken, which is normally worldwide is 1 year or 12 to 15 months. India, it was a 4 years. Now it has reduced to 1.6. That is also a drastically improvement. Recovery also, that if you see the worldwide recovery is 50% plus or around this. India was 25, 26, 26, 26. Now it has reached to 71%. So that is this year data, which we can see that there are so many changes are taking place. No doubt, there are some issues are also there, which we will discuss with Dr. Sahu and how to improve this. Simultaneously, 3 amendment has taken place, COVID-related amendment in IBC. One is the enhancement of default from 1 lakh to 1 crore. Then suspension of fresh insolvency for 6 months, which can extend it to 1 year from 25th March 2020. Then no application shall be filed for the default occurred during this COVID period, and that is in the lifetime of company you cannot file because of this, something has gone for COVID. So these are the 3 major amendment has taken place. Next. Now these are some road ahead. Future development in IBC, cross-border insolvency, pre-package insolvency, insolvency resolution framework for MSME, and the individual bankruptcy. Next. Now, first is the cross-border. The cross-border is where Indian company can go outside and outside company can come inside, and then both have multiple jurisdiction. Both the lenders can take the advantage of the asset. At present, only section 235 and 234 of the code deal with the cross-border having limited scope. Separate framework insolvency board is working. Now the impact of this will be very huge. Cross-border provision will empower foreign creditors to claim asset on insolvent Indian companies and vis-a-vis. Well, simultaneously, we can also claim. For this, you have to go for various arrangement with various countries. Ease on resolution. M&A outlook of India will improve, boost investors' confidence, and they can put, and we have more money and more asset under our control. Next. Second is pre-package. This is a new concept which will introduce, and this package, pre-package is This as in US and UK is a hybrid model of out of court settlement and court supervised process. Here, the creditor reach an agreement with buyer for a sale prior to initiating of CIRP. So this is out of court settlement with the supervision of resolution profession. Currently there is no provision, but this issue is going on. And when the MCA secretary was going, he has given a very interesting interview, and he has mentioned about this point. Now, what will be the impact if it is coming? It will promote early debt restructuring in a manner that best achieve the code objective, offer a chance of debtors company to revive the company with negotiating with creditors, management to put genuine efforts to revival and continuity of business that will take place. It is a cheaper, it's a speedier, 1/3 time it will take and 1/3 cost will take, and save lot of time of the court. But it has two negative points. It has non-transparent and non-competitiveness. So that issue, when the law will come, that will be discussed. MSME, the new framework that is proposed, and that section 240A of the code deals with MSME, and in this 29A is barring of promoter of a bid for company is exempted. Now, by this MSME, the debtors in control model, while ordinary the corporate insolvency is creditor in control system. No change in control, self restructuring plan will take place. So this is the plan for this insolvency MSME. Then the future of individual insolvency is also going on. No doubt the guarantor issue the insolvency board has approved, but a debtor or creditor can file insolvency resolution, and upon failure of resolution, bankruptcy proceeding can be initiated. Currently, section 94 to 148 of code deals with individual resolution and bankruptcy. Provision in respect of personal guarantor are enforced. However, the respect of individual and partnership are not yet enforced. The only problem is the impact is poor framework for recovery have had an adverse impact on the credit market. Notifying individual insolvency provision will bring financial discipline in the people as well as. But the only problem is that number is high, and unless we are bringing out some automated system and the online system, things in India is very difficult. Now the last is the post-COVID scenario, what will happen? And that is very important, and the purpose of this webinar is that we should, no doubt 6 months has passed, 6 months will also go, and the COVID has come, COVID is going on, but COVID will go one day. So what is next? Are we keep quiet or we should prepare? So the program of the purpose of this program is we should prepare. So for any default prior to 25th March 2020, anybody can take action anytime within the limitation period. So if default has taken place before 25th March, and that is more than 1 crore rupees, then you can take action today also, and you can file your case. That is now very clear. But after 25th March, say 2021, after 1 year, what will happen? So, but during that period of the COVID, no action can be taken during entire lifetime. That is also clearly mentioned. But we have to prepare after the COVID when this 1 year period is over. Now, in my opinion, there will be so many changes that will take place, and that is happening. The people are very conscious. They are working out the financial modalities in a different way. Financial discipline is improving because they have seen the insolvency board or the NCLT, and this code has given the desired result. I have seen we are doing some work of some very big company out of this 12, and I was just saying that this is a bloodless coup which has taken place through insolvency board, where one management was there and now the second management has come without any creating of any bloodbath. So that is the beauty of this law which has taken place. So that's why the people are realizing that the law is not only a teethless, but it has a teeth. It can take away things also. So financial discipline will improve. Chances of settlement might increase because people are realizing and they are settling. Increase in reserve in cash, because people are realizing that during the COVID periods, cash is king. So they are realizing and they are reserving their cash. They are restructuring in a manner that irrelevant business can go out and then can create cash for them, and then cash can be utilized for regularizing their payment. Cost cutting, checks on overheads is going on. That will also improve the liquidity. Changing in business model is also taking place, or irrelevant business people are selling it and focusing on the main business to reach optimum level. That is the focus. All these things will impact, and all these things will give a new dimension to the insolvency law, and that will come. So friends, this is my initial things which I have given, some thoughts, some data, something which we have achieved, something which we want to achieve, and some new road ahead. Now I will request Dr. Sahu to give his address and enlighten us for the road ahead for this insolvency law.
So thank you, Mr. Bijay. Thanks for inviting me to this IBC webinar, Current Developments and Road Ahead from Ease of Doing Business to Economic Growth. I think, as we know, the economic history of India, if you see for last 2000 years or so, we find that enough literature and enough evidence to show that uncycling of economic freedom augments wealth creation. Wood Tilliard's time, he advocated economic freedom by advising the kings to remove all obstructions to economic activity. So traditionally, India followed a market model for wealth creation. There was a small deviation from about 1947 to 1992, but we came back to our roots with the economic liberalization in 1991. The thrust of the reform since then has been provision of economic freedom for farms and building institutions to promote and protect economic freedom and regulate such freedom only to address market failures. In other words, it has been the endeavor to have conducive business regulations that ensure freedom for firms to do business, that makes it easy to do business. That is what World Bank tracks and measures how countries or the economies are facilitating the ease of doing business in their respective countries. Why so much of focus on this? Because an economy prospers when the companies or firms have a maximum freedom with maximum ease. They can shift resources, reshuffle resources from one use to another competing use continuously and seamlessly, and meaning that the limited resources will be put to the most efficient use. And this is possible if one has freedom to move resource from a less efficient use to more efficient use. And such freedom, therefore, if you put the limited resources to the best possible use, then we get the best potential of every firm, every resource. This unleashes, realizes the full potential, full business potential. And therefore, we have several empirical studies establishing that economic freedom and economic performance have a remarkably high positive correlation. The countries which have very high level of economic freedom generally outperform the countries with not so high level of economic freedom. You can look countries across the world, states inside the country, even districts inside a province. You would find the difference that wherever you have little easier to do business, that district, that state does better as compared to other parts of the country. So what we mean essentially is that ease of doing business means people should have freedom. A firm needs freedom broadly at 3 stages of business. To start business, what we call freedom of entry. To continue the business, freedom at marketplace, free and fair competition. And discontinue business, that is we call in economics freedom to exit. The first stage, what we normally see in the stock market, allocation of resources to most efficient use. The second stage at marketplace, that enables the continued efficient use of resources allocated. And the third stage enables release of resources from inefficient users continuously. And together they facilitate the most efficient use of resources and consequently the optimum economic well-being. And economic reforms typically in every country endeavors to provide economic freedom at these 3 stages. The reforms in India in the 90s focused on freedom of entry. When we came up with LPG, liberalization, privatization, globalization, we dismantled the license permit quota raj. We moved from discretionary license to an entitlement of registration. We allowed farms meeting the eligibility requirements to raise resources without requiring any specific approval from state or SEBI. And the reforms, after we made substantial progress on this front, the reforms in the decade beginning 2000 focused on promoting competition, creating a free and fair market. When we jumped the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act, when we felt that we moved away from control of monopoly of firms to promote competition among firms, size or dominance per se was no longer considered bad, though its abuse was. And the reforms provided a level playing field and competitive neutrality, prohibited firms from restricting freedom of other firms to do business. The examples of a direct benefit transfer or the subsidy on account of the LPG or the GST, these are the competitive neutral measures. So after the decade of 2000, having established freedom to start business, freedom to continue business over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, we enacted a new genre of economic laws to facilitate ease of doing business, which expanded who, what, when, how to do list. We repealed several control enactments that restricted freedom, such as the Capital Issues Control Act, Import-Export Control Act, repealed, as I told, MRTP Act to promote competition and scaling up businesses. So this expanded the contours of economic freedom and consequently the freedom of economic development. The outcome has been astounding. Look at the growth rate from 1900 to 1947. We had almost zero growth rate and many years going up to 1% when we did not have the freedom. 47 we got freedom, one kind of freedom, and that freedom helped us to move from 1947 to 1992 to a growth rate about 3 and 3.5%, which some people call that it's a Hindu rate of growth. But when we unleashed the economic freedom in the beginning 1992, look at growth rate over last 3 decades from 92 to 2019, at a stretch for 3 decades. The average growth rate during this period has been more than double the rate we had from 47 to 92. And this is what freedom has done. This is what ease of business, doing business can do. And India is today, despite the COVID, also the fastest growing $1 trillion economy, 5th largest in the world in terms of purchasing power parity, the 3rd largest. After having commenced business, we are in a market economy. A firm can fail to deliver as planned. on account of a competition and innovation. We want to promote competition and innovation because that gives us growth. So on account of a competition, if farms are failing, there must be a way to deal with business. Failure is very important for every economy to progress. In fact, many people say, and I believe that the best success of the insolvency and bankruptcy code we would have maybe a few years down the line when we as a group, nation, celebrate the failure. So farm fails in two situations: when it belongs to an industry where business is no more viable for exogenous reasons like creative destruction or innovation. In these cases, farms have economic distress, they are failing, they are unviable. It is necessary to release the resources of these farms for other competing uses. Also release the entrepreneur to pursue emerging opportunities. Or we may have a situation where farm belongs to an industry where every other farm in the industry is doing well, but the farm in question is not doing well for endogenous reasons, for its own incompetence, inability to compete at marketplace. There could be malfeasance, wrong business model, wrong marketing strategy. But most such farms are in financial distress, they are failing, they are generally viable. It is necessary to rescue them well before it is too late. Where a farm remains under stress for long, its balance sheet gets stressed. Such failure by many farms, particularly large ones, impacts the balance sheet of creditors, particularly banks, and this reduces the availability of funds with the creditors, limiting their ability to lend even for genuinely viable projects, thus restricting the credit growth. The impact is so pronounced where many farms, when farms even fail deliberately to repay the loans. So then in the middle of this decade, we had a situation, what we call a twin balance sheet problem, where both the banks and the farms were reeling under stress of bad loans and hindering economic growth. Now, when a farm experiences financial or economic stress, the resources at the disposal of the farm is underutilized, entrepreneur has failed, there is no exit mechanism, both farm and entrepreneur are in deep distress. In such situation for long, Indian economy suffered the inefficiency of several zombie entities in the system for so long. Given that resources are scarce, failures are routine in a dynamic market economy, India needed a codified structure market mechanism to put the underutilized resources to more efficient uses continuously and free the entrepreneurs from failure. So the insolvency reform through the code provides a market mechanism to rescue a failing but viable farm and liquidate an unviable failing farm and release both resources and entrepreneurs for competing uses and thereby provide freedom to exit. The ultimate freedom, this provides a market mechanism for time-bound resolution of insolvency wherever possible, ease of exit wherever required. If I recite you what Honorable Prime Minister in his address recently in the centenary celebration of Kirloskar Group on 6th January 2020, how he feels about the code. He stated that आजकल इंसॉल्वेंसी एंड बैंक्रप्सी कोड और की इतनी चर्चा होती है, लेकिन यह सिर्फ इतना पैसा वापस आया, उतना पैसा वापस आया, वहां तक ही सीमित रहती है, लेकिन वह उससे भी आगे है। आप सभी यह बेहतर जानते हैं कि कुछ स्थितियों में धंधे से बाहर निकलना ही कई बार समझदारी माना जाता है। ये जरूरी नहीं है कि जो कंपनी सफल ना हो रही हो उसके पीछे कोई साजिश हुई हो, कोई गलत इरादा हो, कोई लालच हो, यह जरूरी नहीं है। इसमें ऐसे उद्यमियों के लिए एक रास्ता तैयार करना आवश्यक था और आईबीसी ने इसका आधार तैयार किया। आज नहीं तो कल इस बात पर अध्ययन जरूरी होगा कि आईबीसी ने कितने भारतीय आदमियों का भविष्य बचाया, उन्हें हमेशा हमेशा के लिए बर्बाद होने से रोका। This is the code. With code in place, the ultimate economic freedom India now provides the complete suite of economic freedom, comprising freedom to start, freedom to continue, and freedom to exit. Mr. Vijay provided a complete chronicle of the development of the code, tracked the developments and all major changes that happened, and including the outcome. I will not get into that detail, but I would only mention that with the enactment of the Insolvency Bankruptcy Code, an altogether new regime that is proactive, incentive compliant, market-led, and time-bound came into existence in India. The code and the underlying reform in many ways was a journey into an uncharted territory, a leap into the unknown and leap of faith. Many institutions required for implementation of a modern, robust insolvency regime did not exist. The law was to be laid down, infrastructure to be created, capacity had to be built, professions were to be developed, markets and practices were to be developed, and stakeholders to be made aware of the code and to accept the change and learn to use it. It was therefore quite natural that the code envisaged a standard plain vanilla process to start with, but anticipated course corrections. You would have noticed the provision, skeleton provision in the law providing for section 234-35 about cross-border insolvency through limited bilateral approach, but anticipated that in course of time, some regular provision would come. The Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee then discussed about the pre-pack, which Mr. Pawan Vijay referred to, but left it for future deliberations. So many such things were discussed, but left for a future deliberations, as we are starting on a slate which was completely alien to the new framework we are talking about. We wanted to move in a gradual fashion, and therefore we are willing to move on the path of quick course corrections. In the initial days of the implementation of CIRP, there were vigorous attempts at times to cling on to the old order. In the old order, it was normal for a creditor to wait till cows come home in order to realize the debt. The very first resolution plan approved under the code, that was Synergy Dure Automotives Limited, that yielded 94% haircut for financial creditors, while the related parties of the promoters rested control over the company. This amounted to rewarding unscrupulous persons at the expense of creditors, which was not acceptable. The code made fast correction. This was, remember, the incident happened, the resolution plan was approved on 2nd August 2017. The course correction happened on 23rd November 2017 that prohibited persons with a specified ineligibility like willful default, NPA for a certain time, and so many other things from submitting a resolution plan in CIRP. In the 3 years since then, I'm not going to elaborate further course corrections. Maybe I'll come only to the last one. I'll skip the rest. But this fundamental course correction, over the next 3 years, we witnessed several companies. Mr. Vijay referred to some big companies like SR, Bhushan, those companies, very large ones, changed hands consequently. The credible threat of the IBC process redefined the debtor-creditor relationship. In one matter, Supreme Court observed with the law in place, defaulters' paradise is lost. And Mr. Vijay referred to also today, many debtors prefer to resolve stress at early stages, that resolving when stress is imminent, on the receipt of a notice for repayment, but before filing an application to initiate CRP, after filing of an application, but before its admission, even after admission of the application, and they are making best effort to avoid consequences of IBC process. Evidence, we have withdrawal of applications filed for initiation of CRP, but before admission, 10,000 plus applications were withdrawn. 215 matters were withdrawn under Section 12A. CRPs have been terminated by adjudicating authority on reaching settlement of parties, even closure of a CRP, taking note of the settlement by the NCLAT, and even at the settlement at the level of the apex court, where the parties worked out a resolution amicably, resulting in swift revival of the corporate debtors. So thus, honest debtor-creditors relationship induced by the code has in turn promoted several resolutions in the shadow or on account of the code. Leaving aside the actual resolutions happening under the code, which Mr. Vijay referred, and I will deal with that a little in detail a little later. Now, code deals with economic matters. It is essentially empiric. Again, in one matter, Honorable Supreme Court observed, the code is evolving through experimentation to meet the emerging needs and to remain relevant to the times. We cannot be expecting that the same code in the exact same fashion would work in today's COVID times without any course correction. And Supreme Court observed then that the denial of the right to experiment is fraught with serious consequences to the nation. There is an insolvency law committee, a standing committee that continuously reviews the implementation of the code to identify the issues impacting the processes under the code and make recommendations to address them. In true spirit of the adage, the road to success always remains under construction. IBC is under construction, and it will remain under construction for a few years. The court has witnessed 5 legislative interventions to strengthen the process to further its objectives in sync with the emerging market realities. The experience and developments over the last 3 years has prepared the ground for further course corrections, particularly in the times of COVID, when the objective is that the code remains firmly grounded in the service of the business and the economy. You would have observed that in the matter of Binani, Honorable NCLAT clarified that the first order objective of the code is resolution, rescuing life of the firm. The second order objective is maximization of value of the assets of the firm. And the third order objective is promoting entrepreneurship, availability of credit, and balancing the interest of stakeholders. And it stated that this order of objectives is sacrosanct, and this is very important now for the course correction we are making. Though it is a temporary course correction, it is not a something lasting nature. Saving life is the most dominant objective, primary objective of the code. IBC endeavors to save the life of a company in distress, and it does everything it facilitates in N ways, starting from going concern, IP, essential services, and so many things. But what it does more is that it empowers the creditors, represented by a committee of creditors, to rescue a company when it experiences a serious threat to its life. For this, the COC has a threshold kind of thing, 3 very powerful weapons, which we did not have in earlier regime. First is, it can take or cause a haircut of any amount, any percent to any stakeholder, all stakeholder, to itself, if it is required to rescue the company. Second, it seeks the best resolution plan from the market, anyone, everyone, around the world can compete to give a plan. Unlike the earlier mechanisms, in every other earlier mechanism that allowed creditors to find a resolution only from the existing promoters, and that is what prohibited success. But the resolution plan today is not limited to only restructuring, rescheduling the payment from the existing promoters. It may entail today a change in management, technology, product portfolio. It may mean acquisition, disposal of assets, change in business model, change in ownership, restructuring, balance sheet, anything, strategy of turnaround, buyout, merger, amalgamation, acquisition, takeover, anything is possible. It provides a competitive, transparent market process which identifies a capable, credible person best placed to rescue the company and selects the resolution plan which is feasible and viable under the circumstances to ensure the sustained life of the company. This releases the company from the clutches of the promoters and management, rightly observed by the Honorable Supreme Court, and puts it in the hands of a capable, credible management to avoid liquidation. Now I fast forward to the 5th amendment, for which has come through an ordinance, yet to be regularized through an enactment. But this has come at a time we are passing through such an unusual time when protecting lives has assumed utmost significance. This in turn requires us to save the livelihood, which in turn requires us to save the lives of the companies. Because companies are engines of growth, they are hope of prosperity for the posterity. They provide goods and services, they provide employment, they provide livelihood, and they often have an organizational capital over and above their liquidation value, and closure of a company destroys the hope and this organizational capital. Therefore, it is necessary to rescue a company from premature death and nurse it back to normal life. In pursuance of the fundamental objective of the code to rescue lives in normal times, the code pursues 2 complementary strategies in case of a stress. One is rescue a viable firm, and second is liquidate an unviable firm. In the normal circumstance, only one strategy leads to 2 outcomes, but this is a complementary strategy. You start a CRP to rescue it, conclude that it is not rescuable, liquidate it with least pain and least cost. But today is not normal times. Today it has become difficult to follow this strategy. The most of the firms which were viable till, let's say, before the lockdown, first lockdown, 25th March, all of them are reeling under stress today. If all such firms were to undergo insolvency proceeding, many of them may end up with liquidation for want of white knights to rescue them. The resolution process typically requires a third person coming in, rescue the person in distress. But when every other firm, every economy, every industry is in stress, this airline is under stress, which other airline can come and rescue it? This restaurant chain is in stress, which other restaurant chain is in good health can come and rescue it? So when we do not have the people to rescue the firms, now the choice has become quite different. We know that if we do not get the resolution applicants, we will end up with liquidation. Assets would have distressed sell for which there are also no buyers. We may realize absolutely nothing or similarly little. Consequently, the firm would have a premature death, while the creditors would realize next to nothing. This neither resolves the stress, nor maximizes the value, nor rescues the company, and therefore not consistent with the objectives of the code in the current circumstances. As I told, Economic matters require constant experimentation. This called for another experimentation, as the complementary remedies, the strategy having the two remedies together today translated to, instead of complementary, they became two competing options. Competing options in the sense that if you continue the operations of the code in a normal way, that means all companies stressed are pushed into the insolvency proceedings. This is one option. If you do this, possibly you may rescue some companies, but you will end up closing in many other companies. But if you do not have this option, if you suspend it for a while, then what would happen is that you will not start the process, and therefore you will not liquidate many unviable companies. So you can suspend the operations of the code or let it continue to operate. These two became the competing options. If you adopt the first option, that is, you suspend the operations of the code, you will fail to liquidate an unviable firm, which is not good for economy, but this mistake can be rectified in the following quarter or the following year. But the second option, that is, if you let it continue to operate as it is, you will liquidate a viable company forever, which can never be rectified. Rescuing a viable firm is far more important than failing to liquidate an unviable firm during the current crisis. So, however, both the options have attendant consequences. Therefore, it was necessary to have a well-calibrated middle path was adopted. Neither the entire code was suspended, nor the entire code was in operations. A distinction was made whether the stress has arisen on account of COVID after 25th March or the stress existed earlier. If the stress existed earlier, something wrong with the business that needs to be resolved. So let IBC continue to apply to them. If the company was doing well till 25th March and has stress only because of COVID, let it get some protection. So it's a very keyhole surgery. Only during this period, if a default arises for the first time, company was healthy earlier, then let's not push those companies into insolvency proceedings. By ordinance, a new section was inserted, section 10A, that prohibits filing of applications for initiation of a CIRP for any default that arose on or after March 25th, 2020 for a period of 6 months. We do not know how long it will continue, but it must not exceed 1 year. Government will take call, but this is the time when the COVID has this sway. But important to note that first is this suspension, the default was taken out of the purview of a CIRP, but not taken out of the definition of a default. This remains a default for all purposes under the code, except for the purpose of initiation of a CIRP. This section further clarifies that applications which are already filed for initiation of CIRP pending before NCLT before 25th March will continue to be dealt. And it also says that the CIRP can be initiated against the companies who had a default even by 25th March, but it cannot be initiated against them who did not have a default but committed a default for the first time during the COVID-19 period. So this would prevent the companies which are experiencing distress on account of a force majeure situation, unprecedented situation, being pushed into insolvency when it is difficult to find the adequate number of resolution applicants to rescue them. The question arises that how do you distinguish whether a company which is defaulting during COVID period, this default is on account of COVID only and not for some other reason? It is not possible to distinguish. If you want to distinguish, then the NCLT or the commercial wisdom of so many people have to be put together to find out whether this company is having stress only on account of distress in COVID or some other factor. But we know that by intuition, one knows that of all the companies which are experiencing default after COVID period has come in, there will be rare cases which have distress for reasons other than COVID. So since it is not possible to distinguish between them, and there is no point in wasting time, futile wasting time for rare cases to find out where it has become. So we have, the preference has been that let's follow a simplistic approach. Let's not distinguish between them. Let's give the same protection to all companies who are experiencing distress, but who are good otherwise, now only during this period. So amendments keeps it simple, avoids a dispute whether a default arose on account of COVID or otherwise. Simultaneously, the threshold of a default for filing an insolvency petition was increased from 1 lakh to 1 crore. This was not by the ordinance, but this was also a part of the package to deal with COVID. And the whole objective here was to prevent MSMEs from being pushed into insolvency proceedings for their failure to service debt obligations on account of pandemic-induced stress. And these are, when this was done, it has been very explicitly stated when 1 lakh to 1 crore was done, or even 10A, the suspension was done 6, 7, 9. These have been done in a context, and the justification is given the very long prelude to the ordinance explains why this is being done, and that tells very clearly that it applies only to default happening during this period and nothing else. So very precisely application and precise exemption. Nevertheless, we know that there is a stress in MSMEs, in other cases. So there is a thinking, in fact, I would say that there's the considerable progress, work is in an advanced stage to provide alternatives even at this time. Two things which Mr. Bijoy referred. One is a special framework for MSMEs. The pre-packs, these are for pre-pack, there is a committee which should finish work in another 15 days time or so. MSME, the package, the plan is almost finalized, is now under consideration of the government. So these are the things that MSME would enable a debtor to start the process even if there is a blanket ban under section 7, 9 or 10. Why there is a preference for a package? There is a thinking, there is a debate whether the other mechanisms. Sometimes we get questions that what are the other options available when you have suspended? As I told, suspension is only in respect of fresh defaults. That is only a very small part of the IBC is under suspension. The bigger part is in force. RBI restructuring prudential framework is there, company section 230 is there, and also nothing stops a debtor and creditor to sit across the table, work out an arrangement, resolve their issues amicably. And I'm sure, like the necessity is the mother of invention, people will find out alternate ways of resolving stress in addition to government's initiative of providing a special format for MSME resolution, and also a format in the form of a pre-pack which can help at this time. And very briefly touching the outcome of the process so far. As I told, the objective is rescuing the life. It has rescued 225 companies till March 2020 through resolution plans. These companies owed. This is the companies have been rescued. In addition to rescuing the company, what has been the outcome in terms of recovery? If it were only recovery proceeding, people would have recovered, company would have bled to death. But companies, 221 companies, very big companies have been saved. And these companies owed 4.13 lakh crore to creditors, but the assets available with them, realizable value available with them was, when the process started, only 0.96 lakh crore. About 22% of the outstanding loan amount was available in the form of assets. We started at that situation. Even then, we rescued the company, and the creditors got 1.84 lakh crore, which is about 200% of the realizable value of this company. If these companies would have been liquidated, they would have got 100, but now they got 200. That extra 100 is bonus, and company got rescued. If creditors had followed any other method, like Mr. Vijay told, somewhere Lok Adalat or debt recovery, they would have got 3%, 5%, 10%. Here the financial creditors got 46% of their claims, which is quite high, noting that people normally invoke IBC process only after they have exhausted all other options. That means where the realization or recovery or possible rescue is higher have been resolved otherwise. Only the ones which did not work there came here, despite that they have given a recovery of 46%. Yes, there is also a feeling that while 221 companies have been rescued, 914 companies have proceeded for liquidation. Number wise, it gives an impression that companies 4 times of the companies rescued have gone to rescue for the liquidation. But please note that the companies which were rescued, they had assets left with them when they started the process, about 1 lakh crore. The companies which have proceeded for liquidation, they had assets when they started the process about 0.35 lakh crore. That means the assets rescued is 3 times of the assets proceeding for liquidation. In value terms, the distressed assets being rescued is 3 times of the assets proceeding for liquidation. And more interesting is, of the companies rescued, 1/3 of them were either defunct or under BIFR, and of the companies sent for liquidation, 3/4 were either defunct or under BIFR. Many of the companies which have proceeded for liquidation, they owed huge amounts of money, but assets were not available. Generally, the assets available with the corporate debtors was about 3 to 4% on average of the amount of the claims they had. Many such companies did not have any job assets when they entered the process, and normally the recovery has been, the realization has been equal to the liquidation value. And as I told you, and Mr. Vijay also told, since this has changed the debtor-creditor relationship, the outcome is happening, but in the shadow of the code or on account of the code, not directly through the process. Timelines has been, as Mr. Vijay referred to, 1.6 years, it has come down. But on that front, I don't think that we have really made a great progress. We have to work further. We have missed the deadlines, but endeavor is, and now that many of the legal issues have been sorted out, the capacity has developed, except for COVID, which has become a setback when the matters are not moving very fast. But in due course, we should be able to adhere to the timeline. Since we started with the ease of doing business, this impact Mr. Pavan Vijay referred to in World Bank's groups doing business reports, India's rank moved up from 136 to 52 in terms of resolving insolvency in the last 3 years on account of the enactment of the code and its implementation. This is the progress we have achieved, but there is a long way still to go. Many things are in the pipeline. Some of I mentioned MSME, mentioned pre-pack, that they talk about Indian insolvency, talk about the cross-border, talk about the fresh start process. So many things are in the pipeline. I will conclude here. I would be happy to take a few questions. Thank you very much. Thanks, Mr. Vijay, for inviting.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for giving in-depth detailed analysis and detailed development. And now I will request Manoj to take up his part, and then we'll take question answer. So we have received some question answer. Anybody has any questions, please send it to us. I will prepare. In the meantime, Manoj, please take up.
Yeah. Good evening, respected Sahu sir, Pawan sir, and my dear friends. As Dr. Sahu has lucidly described the objective and achievement of the law, and sir has already, Pawan sir has also given a detailed journey of the law, evolution of the law, and then what are the road ahead, new things coming, and the impact of the COVID, and what Dr. Sahu has just said, that why and how, why it's important to bring this ordinance which has partially suspended the implementation of IBC. I think not much is left to discuss, but still I would like to give a brief discussion about this IBC. I think, as Dr. Sahu has clearly said, this IBC is one of the game-changing legislation which has immensely helped in economic growth and ease of doing business. So in a way, it is an economic reform and not just a legislation. It has evolved very fast over a period of 3.5 years. It has become a very, very important legislation and very helpful in the economic growth and ease of doing business for us. And the evolution has happened not only because of this law, importance of this law, but because the legislature, the regulators have regularly intervened whenever it was required, taken feedback from the community users, and changed the course of the law. Then similarly, judiciary has also played a very good role, and they have changed the law whenever they have defined the law whenever it was required. And sometimes their judicial decisions were also taken up by the regulator in their regulations. So all those made this law very, very proactive, very fast moving, and very successful. Legislature and basically, as Dr. Sahu has said, the purpose of this law, primary purpose was to resolve insolvency. And the insolvency resolution is the key to unlock the value of the assets trapped in the insolvent or sick financial sick businesses, sick companies. So the other objective, as he has mentioned, is the maximization of the value of the business assets. So there is always a debate. What is the purpose of, what is the maximization? Is it the realization for the secured creditor, unsecured creditor, or it is for all stakeholders, and the business revival should be the objective of the law. So I have read this process of bulletins of the IBBI, and Dr. Sahu has clearly mentioned in detail. He has elaborated what is the objective, what is the meaning of the maximization of value of asset. It is not only about the maximization of realization for stakeholders like secured creditor, unsecured creditor, but as the realization of maximization of value of the assets as a whole. The business asset should be given should realize its own real potential, so that it is for the benefit of everyone. So that is the key purpose of the law, and hence it will be beneficial in the economic growth of the country. Then Dr. Sahu has rightly said that it gives a freedom to exit. So business failures are inevitable. As we all know, the entrepreneurship means having taking risk of failure. So whenever there are entrepreneurship, there will be certain successes, certain failures because of the external or internal reasons. But whenever the business is failed, it is important that it should be revived. If it can revive internally, then it's okay. If not, then some third party can intervene, third person can infuse fund or bring new technology or something like that, so that it can revive. And if that is not happening, nothing can happen, then liquidation is the only solution. Liquidation will help to unlock the value trapped in those assets. So those objectives, and according to achieve these objectives, the law has sufficient tools and mechanism inbuilt in it, and it has certain collateral benefits. Like the most important benefit, I believe, is the financial discipline which is coming. People are very fearful about the change in control, losing the control over the assets, and hence they are making the payments on time. Then they are rationalizing the cost, using efficient use of technology and funds and assets of the company, so that there is no need to, no risk of going into insolvency. So this culture is coming, and that is the ultimate benefit of this law in the economic growth. So we have discussed many things. New things are coming, and various changes have already made. A few changes which are very important were one is introduction of section 929A, which was one of the earliest one, and it has changed the scenario. Earlier that before this, there were many section 10 applications were coming, where the companies were coming, the promoters are promoting the insolvency, admission into insolvency. But after this, because this shattered their hope to coming back into power, this section 10 has become very less used instrument in the law. So there is still a debate whether this section is right. One side is just about the unscrupulous persons coming back into the business, or let's say we can say this providing capitalism issues were there, but also the question of economic rationale, commercial rationale of the banks and financial institutions is hindered. So sometimes company goes into liquidation because no third party is willing to take over the company, and management is not in a position to take over due to 29A. So then one more important recent amendment was relating to introduction of 32A, which has given a protection to the companies which have got resolved or gone into liquidation, and new management has come. The regulators, it has given the protection that no regulatory action can be taken against the new management only after the change in control through IBC. This law is, this provision is already there, but still I think many of the regulators are not convinced. They want to continue with the process initiated earlier, or sometimes some regulatory authorities have taken possession of the assets of the company, and they are not willing to release those. So resolution is becoming difficult. Then the provisions with respect to home buyers which were introduced, and as a fiction, the home buyers were made to be financial creditors. Later on, now they have the law has further changed that it cannot be by a single person. But this change has substantial impact on the provisioning of the working of the IBC. Then the new provision relating to withdrawal of insolvency, as Dr. Sahu has said, there are many cases which got resolved even before going into the admission stage, and there are other cases also where after admission, even before the introduction of section NCLT and appellate tribunals have allowed cancellation or stoppage of the insolvency proceedings. So this provision has come. However, there are still very many debates how to what to do how to protect the interest of operational creditors and other creditors in case 12A is invoked, and the committee of creditors which have majority, mainly the financial creditors, and they take decision in their benefit. not considering the impact on the small operational creditors. So these issues are there. In practical sense, if we, as a practitioner, we see that though the law provides for going concern of the company to protect the going concern, and for that they have also allowed interim financing, and also that essential service should not be disrupted. However, we find it very difficult to convince the lenders and bankers in the committee to allow for the interim finance, which is very difficult, which makes it very difficult to keep the company as a going concern. So I think these are some of the. Then we have found in some cases that the companies are forced to liquidation just because of the alignment of interest of the members of the committee of creditors. So these issues are regularly faced, and I think slowly these things will evolve and change. Bankers' mindset, lenders' mindset will change, and they will realize the real intent of the law, and not to recover maximum things. So it is not a recovery tool. It should be a tool for maximization of value and revival of companies. That is our hope. So I think these are some things which some questions and some issues which we regularly face, and we found discussions. So I have tried to highlight. Sir has said that the real benefit of this law should be that there is no failure of business, but practically it is not possible to have no failure of business. Failure will be there because there are entrepreneurship, so there will be the risk of failure of the business, and there are several genuine failures, so protection should be there for them. Thank you. I think further we will discuss on the question answer from public.
Thank you, Manoj. Thank you very much. Sir, we have received various questions. So I'm just raising some issues. So please give the answer so the people can be benefited. One is, are there any chance of future if IBBI may reduce minimum default limit from 1 crore rupees?
I think I stated that this change has been done in a specific context. So both 1 lakh to 1 crore, section 10A, for both there is a preamble kind of thing giving explanation of why this is being done. So one would expect that when the normal times come back, we should have again normal limits. But I can't tell nobody can tell the government's intention at that point of time. So one would expect that all these measures are done in a context, and when the context changes, measures would also be changed, would also be reversed.
Okay. Sir, can you provide some clarity on action of ED in attaching the asset of the corporate debtor undergoing CIRP? Is ED empowered to do so since IBC has overriding effect of all other laws?
I think since that matter is a sub judice, law is before you. New section 32 inserted in the code, and which has been passed by Parliament. So law is before everyone of us to read and get the meaning. But then every law, when it is implemented, goes through a process. It is tested, and from that test we get jurisprudence. And since the matter is sub judice, I think I better do not give any view on this.
Okay, sir. Sir, how would you respond to the comment that RBI resolution plan is a death canal of IBC?
Yeah, I don't have to react on this. We are in a market economy where we believe that market should provide options. People should have many options, and those should be competing options. And people should choose one among them. At what happens in the marketplace, it's like that. market participants would decide which one is good for them in a given context. Somebody would find RBI restructuring plan is better. Somebody would find IBC plan is better. Somebody would say that no, neither of these serving my purpose. I will go to section 230A, or I will do a deal with the debtor or creditor among ourselves. And he would also compare many other options of recovery. All these I told you, these are resolution options, 230A or 230 of the Companies Act or IBC. RBI is only a restructuring option, and but the many creditors have many other recovery options. RBI restructuring option is available only for the regulated entities, but other creditors who are probably in the major larger chunk, if we talk about the loans to MSMEs or even proprietorship and partnership firms, where non-banks are dominant, who are not regulated by RBI. But IBC has certain features. Why people should prefer IBC? Restructuring plan has also prudential framework for RBI has also certain features. So each has its own merits, and I can talk about the merits of IBC. I don't want to, nor also I know fully about the other options. But IBC's advantages are, one is, it is the moment the process starts, there is a calm period. One can work peacefully, so many people cannot simultaneously chase the company, have a recovery proceedings, and pull the target in different directions. And here we do not need any kind of ICA arrangement, but people will vote at the right time, and the majority, 66%, will decide the fate of the company. So one key advantage of this is that it enjoys moratorium, and second key advantage is that its outcome, being a court-blessed process, statutory process, is binding on all stakeholders, including the government, including the, we just talked about 32 enforcement directorate. It is binding on everybody. So therefore, while the restructuring plan may not be binding on everybody, section 230 may not be binding on everybody. So the binding nature of the IBC process and moratorium, these two are distinct features, which are its USPs. But as I told you, every other scheme has its own selling USP, unique selling propositions, but it is for the stakeholders to choose.
Okay. Sir, subsequent to COVID-19 scenario, don't you think that role of RP and IP will be limited, considering the fact that no new application will be admitted for 1 year, and also the role in MSME insolvency procedure is reduced? So the role of RP will not reduce.
In fact, I think I had explained this in some other context by telling a story. The story was that two notorious students, they were studying in a school. They rounded up 3 goats, and on their back they wrote 1, 2, and 4, okay, and left them in the campus of the school. Next day, everyone comes, discovers that something wrong. All of them find 3 goats, but all of them searched, goat 3 is missing. They searched for days, evening happened, but they could not get the goat because that never existed. So what has happened is that sometimes we give undue focus in our life also to the thing which you do not have. If one button is missing on your shirt, you think that everything is missing, your entire shirt is of no use if that button is missing. So similarly, what we have today is 12,000 applications already pending before NCLT for admission. Applications can be filed against existing defaults as on 25th March. Applications can be filed after the COVID period is over, which is maximum 1 year. Any default arising after that, ongoing CRP, ongoing liquidation proceedings will continue. So today we have about, of the 4,000 CRPs, so 2,000 are ongoing. The rest have been closed in different form, and some have gone to liquidation. And there is also voluntary liquidation of about 500-700 companies. So today work available is in respect of 2,000 CRP. But I gave you an idea of how many CRPs are in pipeline. In fact, we do not have a capacity to handle the existing workload. So I don't think that this is completely, people believe that something is missing and that is the whole thing of my life. And that thinking has to change. Unlike every other country in the world, they have suspended insolvency for a certain period. But we did not do that. We told that insolvency arising only during this period will have some limitations. So every other thing is open. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Can the creditor join hands together to cross the revised threshold of 1 crore rupees? Like two creditors of 50 lakh can join hand and they can claim for 1 crore rupees. Is this possible?
No, I think this is already settled matter. The company owes debt of 1 crore. That is all. I think it does not have to be one person, and that is why particular for financial creditors, we allow, even if I am a financial creditor, there is no default to me, but the company has defaulted 1 crore to you. So I, with zero default to me, I can also initiate the proceeding. So I don't think it is that it has to default has to be each creditor to be 1 crore. It's not like that.
Okay. Sir, the future of this pre-packaged insolvency is one form of privatization of insolvency process. Can we say the profession will play a role of a lower degree than the things? So it's not a, the question is, pre-package is a privatization of insolvency process.
I don't think it is something of privatization or publicization. Insolvency is an outcome of market forces. Insolvency code provides only a market force to resolve the insolvency. You and me, professionals, insolvency professionals, IBBI, NCLT, government, we all exist to help the market people to take decision about the insolvency. In India, everywhere, that's why I started my talk that we are in a market economy. It is the market which will decide what is good for them, whether they decide through normal CRP, through pre-pack, through MRP special package. Everywhere it is the market participants, it is their money, they will decide the fate of the company. It must not be, and if somebody believes that I as an insolvency professional, I must have a stay in the revival of the company, he is completely mistaken. His job is only to assist the market participants to work out a resolution. He will see that the due process is followed, there is a fairness, compliance to the applicable laws. You will keep on complying laws, and if it is a credit, if it is a RP in possession model, if it is not a debtor in possession model, he will also run the business. But he can't take the decisions like Section 28 decisions, which requires the approval of a committee of creditors. So it is reiterating that insolvency is an outcome market. Market must find the solution. IPs or other professionals, they have no role except giving professional advice.
Sir, you have mentioned in one of your messages that value versus price, both are different. So can you just explain this value versus price? The people are confused, and then the value of the amount of CD versus the claimant amount. So these are the 2 points which you have mentioned. If you can just tell some point on this.
See, value ranges from, value of something has a range. It cannot be less than 0. It cannot be above a limit. price has no limit. Price can be negative. Price can be 100 times. Price has no limit. Price can go to any extent. We saw recently crude selling below zero price at a negative price in many countries. We had a recent instance in Indian stock exchanges. Shares got sold at a negative price. Price can be negative, positive. It has no range. It can be minus infinity to plus infinity. But value is not like that. Value has a minimum limit. Value has a maximum limit. Value is a professional opinion. That is not a market outcome. You can decide the value of a share, value of a company is something.
Sir, your voice, Sahu sir, your voice has gone. Please check voice.
I think he had internet issue, some internet issues.
No, नहीं voice बंद हो गई. Sir, आपकी
And
voice
we
बंद
have
हो
an
गई.
instance.
Yeah.
Acha.
Yeah.
Let me repeat.
Yeah.
I just told that recently crude was sold at a negative price. Recently in Indian stock markets, some shares were sold at a negative price. Price can be negative, can be positive. It can be minus infinity, it can be plus infinity. But value has a floor and a ceiling. Value cannot be below zero and cannot go above a point. Value is a professional opinion. That's not market price. You can value a share or a company at X, but there may not be market to buy that company or share at X. So there we go by the realizable value. We had an instance where NCLT or NCLAT, I think, they did not approve a resolution plan because the value under realized resolution plan was less than the liquidation value. But Supreme Court told you this is in order to approve. Market people, they are deciding how much they can get. They may feel that if the company goes into liquidation, possibly the realization they will have after 3 years after meeting the cost of expenses would be much less than the so-called liquidation value or fair value. So therefore, one should not be having any rigidity that if I am not getting X amount which is not higher than fair value or liquidation value, we should not take the decision, we should not do the transaction. So value is a matter of opinion, it's a professional thing, but you have to go by the what market gives. And value is a context specific. It depends on various assumptions. And you get a value from the resolution plan, the resolution price you get. The way you think about who is giving, who is taking, if you play with all those variables, in some circumstance you will find it is worth accepting a proposal, and with the same value, in another circumstance you will find that proposal is not worth accepting. So this has many dimensions how much you get under resolution plan. That would decide if you factor all dimensions, or if you add, in that article I told, if you add an additional piece of information, your decision changes.
Okay. Sir, when the provision of individual bankruptcy will come into force?
I will ask this question to an astrologer.
Okay. Sir, what is your view on the potential extension of the moratorium on section 7, 9 and 10? By when should the moratorium be lifted in your opinion?
If you can tell COVID will come to an end on 31st March 21, then I can tell the date. So this is we have no information when this, we are all experimenting and we get a little more information, we revise our outlook. In March, we thought, let's have 21 days lockdown, things is a temporary problem. We will somehow, we did not have information about the nature of this COVID. So as we are getting more and more information, uncertainty is reducing. So at one point of time, we took the call that probably 6 months will be adequate. But we never know. It may not be adequate. 1 year could be required. So then an option has been given to government to take a call, and that 6 months is coming to an end in early September. In September, government will take a call, but you cannot rule out any possibility given the uncertainty associated with the COVID.
Sir, very interesting question has come. What action can be taken against the RP if he does not run the plant and hence it leads to liquidation of the company, as the some RP says that going concern means the electricity should be on, office should be running, and employee should come to work. Running the plant is not mandatory.
I think these are too simplistic. One does not take decisions just by such statements. One has to go deep into it. If a company is a going concern at the beginning of CRP, it is his job to keep it going. All the facilitation, the moratorium, continuation of critical services, non-termination of licenses, all these are done to run the business, not just to open the office door. But if the company was not a going concern to start with, we had the same situation with many companies, because many companies, or the Synergy Dura, I gave you example, it was in BIFR for last 12, 13 years. So company could be to start with not a going concern. You can't force IP to start it, but if you can start well and good, it should be appreciated. But if the business was going on and he does not carry on the business, I think it will be considered as dereliction of duty. But I have contrary to that. SR example, there the RP made a profit of 5,000 crore during this time when the company was running at loss earlier. During his period, he converted to a profit, and a huge profit, which led to a fight who will take that money, and that was decided by the Supreme Court. So there are, you have IPs of all kinds, companies of all kinds, unique problems with different companies. It's not, one can't just straight away say that yes, company was like this and IP should have done this. It's a case specific, one has to examine.
Sir, I just take few more questions and then we'll close it, sir. Sir, one question is that shareholder is not there in IBC process because it's creditor driven. There is one suggestion has come that if you see the, I'm just taking example of 12 companies which has gone for liquidation. Still out of this, some companies rates are coming in the system. They are tradable in the market. So no doubt, Ruchi Soya is tradable, Alok Industries tradable, okay, Jyoti Structure, JP Infratech. I'm taking a JP Infratech example. The JP Infratech is tradable as 1.38, and every day so many transactions are taking place. But if you see the resolution plan, it is talking that the company will go for delisting. So now the investor, those who have lost money in the market, again they are investing in this company thinking that this company revival has taken place, but they are not aware of the entire thing. So you don't think that all these companies where the plan has gone for this, that the company will go for delisting, the stock exchange should take some action and keep these companies separately, because the trading will not yield any result for them.
I don't think people invest in shares only for trading. Second, it is the information. We are living in a disclosure-based regulatory regime. We are in stock exchange. Every company, as when it is listed, is making disclosure that this is happening to me. Despite that, if somebody buys, and you can't say that I do not understand, I do not know, but I will buy the shares of a JP or some other company, I don't think somebody can help you. If you are buying shares, you must take decisions, informed decisions, and you must be responsible for the same. You can't be saying that somebody else should have informed me, guided me, and then I would have done the trade. And it's not that somebody who has lost money, he is buying, he is taking the call. The objective is that you disclose, like all of you know the Satyam debacle. After that big disclosure was made, the big decision SEBI was to take whether to continue the trading of Satyam. The decision was taken in 5 minutes time because only 5 minutes left for the market opening. That trading will continue, and that proved to be the right decision. So you give the information. Those who have a share who want to get out, let him have the opportunity to get out. Those who want knowingly the state of the affairs, still they want to buy, they find that it has a value somewhere, let them buy. So I don't think there should be any embargo, but awareness can be created. SEBI has a lot of initiatives, including resource person schemes, so many things to create awareness. There can be a special effort both by SEBI and IBBI to create awareness about the companies, listed companies undergoing CIRP or liquidation.
Sir, I quoted your quote that the best use of the code is not to use the code. One person has asked this question. It means that by saying this, you want to create the future. You want to create a negative feature for the insolvency professional because you are saying not to use the code. So people are confused by this statement which I have given. That will close the business of IP.
I don't think the reforms are done to create or support livelihood for a profession. I think we have to move out from that. Having said that, the objective is that a company should be rescued well in time. Who can help in the rescue process? It is not necessary that rescue will happen only through CIRP. Rescue is happening today much before CIRP. Happening through mergers, amalgamations. The number of mergers and amalgamations have gone up in the last 2 years. Or the resolutions happening before reaching NCLT. Who are doing all this? These are being done by the insolvency professionals. Further, imagine, see the size of the country. It is planning to go to $5 trillion. Imagine the level of competition and innovation in the country, and which is going to be much, much faster, more dynamic. At marketplace, whatever you do, all can't run at the same speed in a race. One will be ahead, one will lag behind. Those who are lagging behind, they need support. Either you help them to run faster, give them some kind of support.
Got muted.
Sir, your voice has muted, sir. Just, yeah.
When
No,
we have, I don't know if how long I missed it, maybe.
Can you carry on, sir?
Essentially, I am telling that our economy is huge. The competition and innovation, because of which companies die, because of which business fails. I just talked that we want to celebrate failure. So that is going to happen more often if we want growth. We will be promoting competition and innovation. We will have more and more market failures. Those companies have to be rescued. But we do not want also a situation where every company reaches that stage. We do not want a situation where people through mala fide means reach this stage. If somebody is having mala fide means like the avoidance transactions, we want to stop that. We do not want a deliberate business failure. We want care should be taken much in advance so that IBC becomes the last resort, not the first resort. We do not want IBC, we do not want insolvency proceeding just to create livelihood for IBBI or its chairman or somebody else.
Okay, sir, last question to you. You have written an article recently on IBC is a code of corporate governance. And where you have mentioned because it's a saving life, maximize value, benefit of investors and protecting the governance. So the point is it really creating a good governance process through IBC?
I think some of us are confused about the meaning of a corporate governance. Many believe that corporate governance is having independent directors, regulating related party transactions. Those are important. But my concern is company must live fast. First objective is that company must live. Next is it should generate value. Next is it should distribute the value. I consider that as corporate governance which ensures the continued life of the company. If you do not have the life of the company, the rest are of no use. So that is the first order objective. I have given in that article, you refer to how the life of a company has reduced over time. The average life of the companies, which was 90 years about 100 years ago, has come down to 19 years today. Today you find all big companies, they are all 20-year-old, Microsoft being the eldest of them. We created companies to live much beyond us, but they are having life. All the listed companies average life after considering the amalgamation, merger, insolvency, the average life has come down to 10 years. So I think the first call of the corporate insolvency, the insolvency code is that the life of the company should be increased. Their longevity should improve. And that is what I consider corporate governance. And if you do that, no way related party transaction is less important. No way independent director is less important. All of them are there to sustain the life. Related party transaction means you are transferring value from company to somebody. If you prevent that, then you sustain the life of the company. So I'm saying that all the measures that can sustain the life of the company, that is corporate governance, and there the core plays a significant role.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you. Friends, we have received various questions, but some of them are suggestions. So that suggestion I am not taking up. I will send it directly to Sahu sir. And some questions are too big with so many examples which we can't take up now. And some of the questions are repetitive which we have given reply. So few questions are left out which we have received just now. We will try to give the answer, and all the suggestion we'll send it to Sahu sir. So now we are coming to end of this program. So the message is very loud and clear, which Dr. Sahu has mentioned, and this is a I think jo aayega wo jayega. In India, I remember there are so many companies which are not able to close up. Everybody was saying, any foreigner were coming, they were saying कि India में company खोलना is easy, but closing is difficult. So now you have the Ministry of Corporate Affairs is doing work out. They are doing so many work, and simultaneously the company which has a asset and which is a running company but has a problem, now it has a solution of through insolvency. So friends, if you see this, the insolvency has reached to the settlement of creditors to the economic growth. So now, and then governance also. So many things are there, and so many things has discussed with us. And thank you, Dr. Sahu, for giving insight and giving answers of maximum queries which we have received. So we are very grateful, very grateful to you, sir. You have spared your valuable time on a very hectic day. I know you have so many meetings. Friends, I thank Dr. Sahu and Manoj for giving valuable insight. Any questions is pending, we'll give reply to you, and we'll take feedback from sir if it is required, the sir's view also. So now friends, with this closing of this, what we are doing, 21st, we are organizing 21st Friday, we are organizing program. Now this is a slightly changed for the benefit of the professional. We are organizing program of empowering through professional networking. This program is very useful for CS, CS advocates, CWA valuation professional and insolvency professional. You remember our Prime Minister has said that, and they are saying Atmanirbhar Bharat. So Atmanirbhar Bharat requires that in India, we should also form big companies, big firm, like Big Four, big international law firm. If you see the international law firm or Big Four, they have 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 partners. But in India, we have 95% business is a individual business or individual profit practice. We want to discuss threadware, what are the advantages of networking, how to do networking, and how this can create value for all of you. So 21st August, please register yourself for this particular thing, and it will be very useful for all professionals. On 28th, we are organizing program on practical aspects of business valuation, valuation standard, and institutional framework. And friends, we are very happy to inform you, Mark Jaila, he is the chairman of Standard Review Board of International Valuation Standard Council of International Council, and he is from UK. He's a expert in this area, and he's a chairman also. So these two programs we are announcing. So on 21st and 28th we will organize. You can register yourself. So I'm grateful to Dr. Sahu, Manoj, and all other people, and especially I'm grateful to all the participants, those who have come in large number and participated in our program. Thank you very much. Thank you, friends. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.